Hello YouTube! Today we're going to talk about one of the fastest ways to become a loser using the show Solo Leveling as an example of what I want to demonstrate in this video. If you don't know what the show is about, it doesn't really matter because what we'll discuss are themes that are very evident. But just for those of you who want some background, the show Solo Leveling is an anime and it's a story about a main character named Jin-woo, who for the sake of brevity I will call MC for the rest of the video. And this MC lives in a fictional world that functions exactly like our own, except that in his world there are portals that can open pretty much anywhere, and these portals lead to dungeons. The dungeons are full of monsters, and if you beat the monsters, you gain resources. The portals, as I say, can appear randomly anywhere, and you cannot just ignore them. If you leave them unattended for too long, what happens is that a dungeon break occurs, in which the creatures of the dungeon can go outside in the real world and they can just roam and create chaos. So the entirety of society has created a system to take care of these dungeons and collect the resources that are inside, because the resources can make you extremely rich. And to do that, what happened is that spontaneously a portion of humanity has awakened powers that allow them to fight the monsters. And these people are called hunters. Their powers ranging from S to E. So pretty much as a human being in this fictional world, you can either have no powers whatsoever, so you're out of luck, or you develop powers randomly, but the level of powers you get is, yes, random. So you can be like a god out of nowhere, or you can be a complete weakling. A weakling would be someone who is E tier, and then the closer to the S tier you get, the stronger your powers become. And in the story, from what I understand, there are only 6 people who are S tier. So that's not very many at all. The majority of people are D tier, they're going to be E tier. C tier is already fairly strong. And in this context and scenario, the main character of the story is E tier. And not just any E tier, he's actually the weakest E class ever. He is the weakest of all hunters. That's actually his nickname, the weakest hunter of humanity. Meaning that the guy is completely useless and he cannot even defeat a small goblin. So the weakest of the monsters in the dungeons are already out of his reach. And that is going to become very important later on, because we'll see that if the story of Solo Leveling was the story of this guy, MC, getting stronger through efforts and then rising through the ranks, that would be very motivational. It would actually be the exact opposite of what I'm going to describe today. It would be how to not be a loser, how to become a winner. But this story goes in a completely different direction, because it's your classic Isekai. An Isekai is a type of story, light novel, manga, or anime, where the main protagonist is transported into a different world in which he gains fantastical powers. There are many declinations of it. Sometimes the character becomes a god, sometimes they become a slime, sometimes they are transported into a video game, but they all follow pretty much the same formula. But where Solo Leveling differs a bit from other types of Isekai is that, as I said, the MC is E-class. So the fantastical powers he's supposed to get that make him super popular or super powerful are not really there at the start, because he sucks. But something happens in the story where he gains the ability to level up, hence the name of the show. And once he gets this ability, he develops the power to gain ranks. So to go from E tier to C tier to B tier to A tier to S tier, which is supposedly impossible. In the world of Solo Leveling, you are born with a rank and that's it. That's your rank for the rest of times. And it is this mechanism of the story that leads to the two aspects of the show I want to discuss in this video. The first being the training that the MC follows in Solo Leveling to get stronger, and secondly, the philosophy behind the Isekai genre as a whole that, in my opinion, tells lies to the audience that ultimately lead to a loser culture. So let's start with the training. As I said, the main character is given the ability to level up through several means. He essentially gets access to a system, like a video game system, where he can put points in certain categories like an RPG to boost his own physical abilities. And to get these points, he can either kill monsters, so he has to clean dungeons, or he can follow and he can complete a daily strength training quest. And that quest is extremely simple. Every single day, he has to do 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats, and 10 kilometers. If he does that every single day on the dot, he gets points and he gets stronger. If he doesn't do that, he gets a punishment. And if you've paid attention and you have read mangas in the past, you might have noticed that this is the exact training routine that Saitama follows in One Punch Man. Saitama does this not because he has access to a system or because he can get points, but because he wanted to become a superhero. And so, by following the routine, his hair falls out, he removes his limiter, and he becomes superhuman. That, of course, in the story of One Punch Man is a joke. And it's sort of the same in the story of Solo Leveling. But the issue is that, apparently many people didn't catch up on the irony and the sarcasm, and so the routine has gone semi-viral, where a bunch of people who have never trained in their life are following this solo leveling training routine in order to get jacked. But the issue is that the routine in itself, be it in One Punch Man or Solo Leveling, is total garbage because they're created by authors who have no experience of resistance training. So they just write whatever, meaning that if you end up following that same routine, you're going to get very disappointing results. And let me explain to you why, because I think that it would be too easy on my part to just say, this is bad, don't do it. I think it's very beneficial for you if you are the type who lacks the experience to be able to tell that it is a bad routine, to actually learn why, because that way you're better prepared for the future. So the first reason, and there are multiple, is that the training of Solo Leveling ignores key muscle groups, such as, for example, the back, the biceps, the hamstrings, and some part of the triceps and shoulders. Because something like a push-up, yes, will train your chest and your shoulders and your triceps to some extent, but it's simply not enough. Likewise, you're not doing a single pull-up or row, so the entirety of your back, which is a big muscle group, is entirely ignored. Squats are not enough for hamstrings, etc., etc. This is a very minimalist routine, meaning that if you follow it, you might get some results, but the physique you'll get at the end will be completely unbalanced because you'll have muscle groups that will have remained small. Case in point, your biceps. I personally am obsessed with biceps, so maybe I am biased for bis, but I think that having big pecs and spaghetti arms is not a good look at all. Then you have the second reason why the routine sucks, the ratio of volume. If you look at it, every single exercise is the same. You do 100 reps. But the issue is that doing 100 bodyweight squats is much easier than doing 100 push-ups. So the ratio between these two exercises is all over the place. It would make much more sense to have you do 10 push-ups and 50 squats. That would be more balanced because the legs are stronger and they recuperate faster. But the routine fails to take that into account. Then the third point is that the routine leaves no room for recovery because you're supposed to do it every single day, meaning that you will at some point be training on sore or under-recovered muscles, which is going to just slow down your growth because you're not going to have a good time, you're going to be underperformant, and your recovery is going to suffer. Then there's the fourth point, the fact that the routine doesn't allow for progressive overload, for what I just said, because it's always the same amount of reps. So you get the same exact amount of volume every single day with the exact same intensity, and that is absolute trash for progression. A good muscle building program gives you room to add or take away volume, and most importantly, it keeps pushing intensity to make sure that you are always challenged. But at some point, you will find out that this will stop happening. The fifth reason also connects to that is the fact that since it's always 100 reps, you don't have any rep range, which means, as I just explained, that you will either be thrown into the deep end at the start of your journey, where it will be way too much for you, so way too difficult, or you will end up at some point good and fit enough to be able to just completely bum rush the routine, and at which point it will be way too easy, it will not be challenging at all, and so it will not allow you to progress. And I know that for some of you guys who are veterans of this fit game, it might be laughable, but you have to understand that for a complete noob, doing 100 push-ups in a day is a lot. Most of them don't have the ability to handle that. And it's the same for a 10-kilometer run. If you've never run before, doing 10 kilometers the first day is a bad idea. You're supposed to ease into it. But again, the program doesn't take that into account at all. And so it goes against the number one principle of any good training program, which is adherence. If the program is not crafted with in mind the idea that you're supposed to help the trainee stick to it, then it's simply a bad program. And then you have the sixth and final nail in the coffin, which also connects to the fact that the program is designed to beat you down or be way too easy, and that's the fact that it has tendinitis written all over it. I guarantee you that if you jump into it untrained, you will develop some form of or another of pain in your Achilles tendon, in your knees and ankles, because the daily runs are going to be way too much for you to handle. Most people don't run at full pace, full intensity every single day. That is just a recipe for disaster. And then you have the push-ups. I personally have kept a close eye on people who have tried to complete the Saitama routine. Most of the time, these dudes ended up with pretty bad pain in their wrists and in their shoulders, because sadly, even though push-ups are an easy movement to recover from, if you do them every single day for 100 reps, eventually you're going to run into problems. And that's something that a lot of influencers ignored on purpose because they wanted to play off of the hype of the routine back in the days to get views, and so they pushed a method that they knew sucked because they themselves never trained like this. All of these buff dudes, all of these calisthenic bros who told you that Saitama's routine was amazing, they didn't get their gains following that bullshit. They pushed it because it made them popular, and it's the same with solo leveling. I'm starting to see people who are touting this routine as being amazing. It sucks ass. They know it, they don't have the decency or honesty to tell you, so I'm here to tell you, please do not follow that routine. It is bad, and it's bad for a reason. It's because it was written to be bad. It's a fictional routine. It was written to be goofy. Keep in mind again that the One Punch Man routine was written as a joke. It was a joke because the routine was way too easy to turn someone into a god. It's the same in solo leveling. The actual reason why the routine exists in solo leveling is as a conduit to get the main character points so that he can improve his own physical abilities. He never actually gets bigger off of the routine. The show itself tells you that. It's the point. We'll get back to that aspect later, but that is something that I want you to keep in mind. Because unfortunately, anime fans tend to be fairly oblivious to that type of jokes. And so I'm seeing a lot of people who are following that routine unironically thinking it's going to get them big. And I've already started to see testimonies of people who come back saying, hey, I've been doing this shit for 2 months and I've seen no change whatsoever. The routine sucks. Well, yes, of course it sucks. But if there is one positive aspect of this entire fiasco that I think we need to outline, it's the fact that it actually motivated people who tend to be extremely sedentary to get off the couch and start training, because the weeb population in general tends to be extremely out of shape. And so that is one thing that I'm going to commend solo leveling for, is that it has the potential to inspire people to get started. But if you get started, please do it the proper way. If you want to make progress, if you want to put on muscle, I would recommend that you start on my novice program. It's very easy to follow, low volume, and you will get much better results. If you want to access it, it's entirely free. It's in the description. I think I'm going to make it the second link. And talking about the description, if you're still here and you like the video so far and you would want to support the channel, you can do it by clicking the first link in the description. You can pledge $3 a month, and that is already a lot of help for me because it allows me to keep making these videos. But now that we're done with the training of solo leveling, it leads us to a very important question. If the routine is so bad, how do we explain that so many men follow it and also follow stories like solo leveling? Well, in my opinion, it's because the very structure of an Isekai is designed to be appealing to young men. If you pay attention, you'll notice that all of these stories, regardless of the minutiae, always follow the same formula. It's always the story of a man, it's very rarely a female, who is not doing super good in life. So they have a boring job, they don't have a girlfriend, they're weak, they're pathetic, etc. And at some point or the other, that person is given an out. So they get transported into a world where suddenly all of their problems disappear, and now they're popular, they have a good job, they're strong, they're good looking, and they become good with girls. Naturally, if you're the type of man who feels let down by society or downtrodden, you're going to like that type of scenario. And Solo Leveling is the exact same. If we look at the main character is the typical underdog character, because he's literally described as being the weakest hunter in all of humanity. This means, of course, that he's bad at fighting, and he's also bad with girls. We see that in the first few episodes where there's a woman that clearly has interest in him, and he's completely unable to bag her because he's way too timid, which is again something that many young men can relate to. But then that same character gains powers out of nowhere, and suddenly in a few episodes he becomes super cool. And so because you could relate to him before that, this transformation brings hope. It brings hope that maybe you could go through the same transformation and your life could improve. And to be clear, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because this formula and this story arc of the male power fantasy, where you essentially project your own feelings onto a character that ends up becoming a superhero of sorts, has existed for literally thousands of years. It was already present in Greek literature. If you look at the story of Hercules, for example, that's exactly that. It's the story of someone who goes through struggles, who goes through trials, and who eventually becomes a better man. And the fact that Hercules was at the start a demigod doesn't make much of a difference. All of this aligns perfectly with masculinity. As men, we are designed to be obsessed with improvement, and so a story that showcases improvement is going to resonate with us. It's going to be something that is going to be very popular with us. But the issue with Solo Leveling and with the Isekai genre in general is how the character gains these powers. Because in every Isekai, the MC becomes the chosen one pretty much randomly and out of nowhere. It doesn't take any efforts on his part, it's essentially just blind luck. And even when there is a reason, when the show tries to give a reasonable explanation, it tends to be an asshole. So I'm not going to spoil you, because some of you might want to discover Solo Leveling by yourself, but even in Solo Leveling, once you learn the reason why the hero was chosen with the capacity to level up, you realize that it's once again an asshole. There's not really a reason, it's just a way to justify the scenario and to justify why that guy was chosen and not someone else. But the issue is that that's not how real life works. This myth of the chosen one is that it's a myth, it's limited to fiction. In real life, no one gets randomly picked to be the main character. If you want to become special, you're going to have to put in the work. You're going to have to go through sustained effort in order to develop that something special. Some individuals might be born into wealth, they might be born with a special talent that you cannot develop with effort, but these people are few and far between. Most likely, you are not that person. I was not that person. Anything special about me as a human, as an individual, is something I had to work for. And that to me is another lesson that the genre fails to teach. Because if you look at something like Solo Leveling, not only is the main character getting the ability to power up out of nowhere, but even that ability itself is completely broken. Because the dude goes from completely unathletic and skinny to super jacked in a few weeks. And anyone who has tried and trained for a long time for aesthetics knows that this is completely unrealistic. It takes months to start seeing results. And if you want hardcore results, if you want people to notice that you lift, that takes years. And this leads to my main issue with Solo Leveling and the training routine that is showcased in it, which is the fact that it wasn't good enough for the main character to have the ability to grow his strength with just training. Because if that was the case, as I said in the start, I think that the story would be completely different. But in the story instead, the training that he puts in only exists as a conduit to gain points. And it's the points that he gets that then allow his body to grow and gain muscle. It's not the training, that is made clear. And I think that's a horrible lesson to teach young men, because it shows that in a story that is supposed to be about self-improvement, normal training wasn't good enough because it wasn't fast enough, so they had to include the idea of magical point like an RPG, which in my opinion kills the idea or notion that Solo Leveling promotes hard work. It doesn't promote hard work, it promotes the exact opposite. It teaches young men that anything that would take time or be strenuous is not worth their effort, that instead they should either look for a magical option that doesn't exist or they should give up. And I say it doesn't exist, correction. It does exist. It's called steroids. If anything, the story teaches young men that if there is a magical opportunity out there to gain muscle super fast, they should go for it. And since young men in general tend to be super impatient, you can bet your eyes that this is going to be extremely attractive. This is the reason why PD users, especially very young ones, are extremely popular on social media, because they tell young men exactly what they want to hear. Fuck your health, fuck your future, do whatever you can to get as big as possible, as fast as possible. And this very same suicidal kamikaze mindset is present in Solo Leveling, because even with these magical points, the hero DMC times and times again puts himself in situations where he should die. He actually dies several times and he gets saved because he can somehow rejuvenate his body when he levels up. You can't do that. And so the last thing you need is to consume the type of media that is going to promote this type of impatient mindset, because sadly, it's not going to align with anything positive for you. And this is why I believe that the shonen genre is much healthier when it comes to media to consume for young men, because it aligns more realistically with what it takes to improve as a man. If you look at most shonen MCs, like in Naruto or in One Piece or whatever, you'll notice that it always takes years for the main character to develop their skills. And it's always through hard work. So if we took someone like Luffy, for example, in One Piece, at the start of the manga, when we start following Luffy, the guy has already been training 10 years, okay? And when he starts, he's not that impressive. He fights people with clubs. He only starts doing really impressive stuff years down the line in his journey, and you see where it comes from, right? There is a payback, and there is a lesson in this. It means, hey, if you want to become cool, become a badass, and improve, it's going to take a lot of work. That, to me, is extremely healthy. Even though arguably in stories like Naruto, you could say that all of that was fate and it was predetermined because the main character in Naruto has a demon inside him and he's the son of a demigod, etc. You have a point, and this is personally what I start to dislike about modern shonen, even in One Piece. I'm not going to spoil, but One Piece is starting to go towards that direction as well, where hard work is less and less important, and now you learn that this guy is actually the son of this guy with magical powers, and it defeats the purpose. In my book, it defeats the purpose, which is why I think that sports mangas tends to be even better in that regard, because in most of their settings, they're extremely realistic. And so if you follow someone like Ippo in Hajime no Ippo, he gets better through hard work alone. There's no outside factor, there's no bloodline genetic thing that gives him a superpower. It's him with his fists and his ability to put on muscle and to get better in the ring. That's it. That is a great story to follow. And I think that young men who are going to be raised with these stories are going to have a much easier time getting jacked, but also improving as a whole. I think that if you take someone from my generation who grew up watching DBZ, for example, and watching Goku and Vegeta train their asses off to defend planet Earth, you're going to have a much healthier outtake and a healthier mindset when it comes to growing your body and growing your mind, as opposed to someone who might be younger, who was raised watching Isekai and who instead is going to grow up in a culture that promotes apathy, because you're essentially just supposed to wait for something magical to happen so that your fate can change. But the issue is that this thing is never going to happen. That is the exact opposite of a culture that is going to prioritize effort and that is going to promote hard work. Now, I know what you might be saying. In Solo Leveling, even though the MC gains the power to level up out of nowhere, he still has to train to level up. So he still has to put in some effort, which leads people to think that Solo Leveling is an anti-Isekai, because it doesn't exactly align with the typical trope of the weak character who is then just propelled into a world where he becomes a god and everything comes easy to him and he has an harem of girls. And I'll give you that. Solo Leveling is much more subtle in that respect. But to me, the idea that it's an anti-Isekai because of it is bullshit. First, because of what I described previously, namely that, yeah, the MC has to train, but he progresses so fast, and he has so many opportunities or strategy to just break the game that he essentially doesn't have to put in much effort at all. I mean, whatever risks he takes, he can teleport out of the dungeon whenever he wants, he can heal his body whenever he wants, he can drink magical potions whenever he wants. That to me greatly diminishes any accomplishment he might be able to actually achieve via his training, and that connects to the overall message that is conveyed by solo leveling and stories like this. Because the show conveys the idea that the only way to improve as a man is to raise your rank within society, which in this word is to become a better hunter, aka to get stronger. And this is a very reductive way to approach self-improvement, because it's super one-dimensional. It creates the assumption that one's worth as a man is evaluated by a single metric, and that is strength. It could also just be wealth, or it could be status or power. And I know that nowadays this approach is extremely prevalent, and you have people who have built an entire base telling young men that the only way to make it or to become a better person is to get rich, it is to accumulate properties or to accumulate women. Some people even go as far as to say that you can judge the worth of a man by how many fast cars they have in their garage. And to me, that is beyond ridiculous, but this message seems to resonate with a lot of people, meaning that now it's no longer about the content of your character, it's about your stats. And in that regard, solo leveling is a form of satire and mockery of that system, because it's the exact same. People are judged based on a random rank that they get at birth, they are judged based on points in strength or dexterity or intelligence that at the end of the day mean nothing deep down, because just because you might be an S tier does not make you a good person, and it does not make you a good man. And this shows if you look at the cast of characters in solo leveling, because a lot of the top hunters who are super rich, super powerful, and super respected also happen to be horrible people. And that would have been a very interesting opportunity for the show to actually lean into the satire and offer a critique of that type of society, of hierarchical society that is based off of material possessions or status. For example, the MC could have realized the absurdity of his situation, realized that putting points in strength didn't actually make him a better person. That would have made for a very interesting narrative. But actually, in the story of solo leveling, the exact opposite happens. If anything, the MC starts as a better person and a better man than he becomes later. Because the more power he accumulates, the more he starts to develop traits that are highly sociopathic. Again, it's a bit of a spoiler. At some point, he kills other humans, and he remarks himself that he has no remorse. And in the situation, it's self-defense, but still, I think that the show doesn't realize the story it's telling. It's telling the story of a man who is accumulating so much power that he's no longer human. He's becoming more and more like a monster. And he's becoming also more and more self-centered. The story attempts to tell you that the MC is doing all of that for his sister and for his mother. That to me is bullshit. The MC is doing it for his own sake because he is literally drunk on power. He's becoming more powerful for the sake of becoming more powerful because he is deeply resentful of a society and a system that put him at the bottom. And in a sense, this makes solo leveling and most Isekai a revenge story. It's the story of someone who has downtrodden a low-value male who is at the bottom of the hierarchy and the pyramid, who suddenly gains powers that allows him to skyrocket his status, and the second he gets that power, he uses it to take revenge on the people and the society that wronged him. Which also means that the main characters of such stories are very unlikely to be good role models because their entire personality is driven by resentment. And it's something that is also visible in solo leveling because the behavior of the MC as he gets stronger becomes suicidal, as I explained. He throws himself in situations that are just death guaranteed, and he gets saved by the scenario times and times again. But that is a bad lesson to teach young men. Also, the guy becomes super ungrateful, which is something that you'll notice yourself. If you've had a very difficult life, the more you gain and the more wealth you accumulate and the more shit you get for free, the less grateful for it you become because you never had to work for it. So because the MC of solo leveling gets everything that he wants in 2 weeks, he gets jacked and he turns into a Chad essentially, he doesn't really care for any of it. He takes it for granted. So another lesson that the story teaches us unwillingly is the fact that the more you have, the less appreciation you have for what you have. Which is super interesting because this means that the story of solo leveling works on two fronts. One, it's a critique of modern self-improvement culture that has become super toxic because it's one-dimensional. And it also works as a critique of predatory capitalism, which I think is not on purpose. The show doesn't seem to be self-aware of all of that. I think it takes itself very seriously, but by doing so, it also works very well to show all of the issues and the flaws with such systems. So to go back on this idea that the show criticizes predatory capitalism, if you look at the structure of the society of solo leveling, it's a society that depends entirely on a certain type of resources, the resources you can find in the portals. And because of that, every single part of society has started to organize itself around the procurement of such resources, which naturally creates a demand. But the issue is that normal people cannot access the resources because they cannot fight the monsters. So the hunters that have that power end up being the ones who have access to all of the wealth that is generated by such resources. But not just them. The CEOs of the people who organize the raids in the dungeons and the companies that own the guilds, because there are guilds in this world that are just as powerful as the biggest companies of our world, also are the ones who are going to amass all of that power because they have a literal monopoly on the resources that everyone needs. And just like in any such system, since it's a competition, people who have predatory tendencies have an advantage because they don't care about hurting other people, they don't care about lying. So you see in the show that the hunters that make the most money are the ones who are not afraid of letting people die, they have no respect for human life, and are just in it for the wealth. And once they have that wealth, they gain more and more power in society, meaning that they turn out to become the people that run shit. And there are a few exceptions to this. I think that the man who runs the Hunter Association, who is a completely copy-pasta of Netero from Hunter x Hunter, by the way, is supposedly benevolent, but even with that, the vast majority of the cast is just assholes. It's men with narcissistic personality types, it's sociopaths with violent tendencies, all of which paints a pretty grim picture of what happens in a society where the people who get to run the entirety of the system are also the ones who are best aligned with the ability to accumulate wealth and resources. And all of that is of course made worse by the fact that in solo leveling, people get powers randomly. So you can literally be born with the power to accumulate resources that will make you immensely rich through no work of your own. And to be clear, that aligns also perfectly with our world, where the vast majority of people who are self-made or who have a lot of money were born into money. It's literally the exact same thing. You're born with a certain number on your bank account, and so your life is set. So I don't know exactly if it's me not seeing it, or if the show is just a very astute critic of capitalism, but essentially the entire system of solo leveling is one that is anti-meritocracy, meaning that it's not about who works the hardest, it's not about who is the best person, it's about who has the power and who can make the most money using that power. And the fact that the main character somehow manages to rise above all of it through training alone doesn't magically solve that. Society hasn't changed. If anything, that guy is just climbing up the ranks to be able to profit off of the rest of society now that he has powers. Instead of becoming an example of what power should be used for, he just becomes another cog in the machine. He just becomes another sociopath. Which in itself might be a disguised lesson, might be a lesson to young men by telling them, hey, if you pursue self-improvement as the pursuit of wealth, you're eventually going to become like the people that you hate, because you're going to live your life exactly like them. But there's another toxic aspect of self-improvement and capitalism that the show has a tendency to romanticize, and that is the grind. Because if you look at the name of the show, Solo Leveling, that aligns exactly with what the MC does. He gets stronger by himself. He clears dungeons by himself, he trains by himself. There's even a scene where he gets his sister to train with him and he just leaves her because she's too slow. And it personally made me laugh because it also aligns with what I'm saying right now. It's the idea that to make it, you have to completely isolate yourself socially, you have to separate yourself from the people in your life, and you just have to grind. You have to grind in the dark for years and years, and then magically you're going to succeed. Well, even in the story of Solo Leveling, that doesn't happen. Because if the MC had done all of these things, if he hadn't had these magical powers that allow him to level up, nothing would have happened. Because the society of Solo Leveling is rigid. His rank would have never actually increased. So that's quite the black pill right there. But worse than that, the practice and the idea of the grind itself is also a form of escapism. And I think that many people don't realize it because we glorify the self-sacrifice and the pain that come with discipline. But if that pain and that sacrifice becomes all there is to your discipline, that to me is just a way that you have employed and created to escape your problems. Because you're essentially running away from them by isolating yourself through physical activity, instead of using it as a way to become more comfortable with who you are as a person. And that also is present in the story of Solo Leveling, because when the character increases his stats, it's not just his body that grows bigger, it's the entirety of his persona that changes. At some point I was watching and I couldn't really figure out what was happening because the show shifted from one main character to the other. It shifted from a guy who was like a meek, small dude to a total Chad. And so for a second I was lost and I thought, did I miss an episode? What happened? Then I realized, no, it's the same guy. When the main character becomes competent and he improves, he literally transforms. He transforms into someone who is not him. He goes from a complete twink to a Chad. And there's also a message in this, and that message is horribly toxic. It's the idea that to be a better person, you have to not be yourself. You have to completely renounce who you are, which is not aligned at all with self-acceptance. That is pure denial. Because the goal of self-improvement should be to take what you have and push it forward, increase it. And of course, there are aspects of your personality you're not going to like and you're going to leave behind, but you're not going to leave all of it behind because you'll find that this is simply not possible. If anything, it would be you lying to yourself. It would be you wearing a mask or pretending to be someone that you're not. And it's another aspect of the show I noticed. The main character was much more interesting and he had a much more interesting personality before the transformation. After the transformation, he becomes super flat. There's nothing much to say about his character because he literally becomes the embodiment of self-improvement. And if you've ever met one such men who are gurus of self-improvement, who live for the grind, you'll have noticed that as well, that these dudes are empty. They have nothing to show for it because their entire personality has become the grind. And that is something that they did to themselves, because there's a big difference between accepting the circumstances you were born into and making the most out of them to improve, and living in an escapist fantasy, where you're essentially trying to run from yourself. And unfortunately, the Isekai genre tends to teach the second lesson. It tends to provide young men with a story that serves more as a means of escapism to run away from their problem instead of a solution to fix these problems. And that's not a glitch, that's a feature. This is the reason why Isekai is popular, because it aligns perfectly with the demands and the sensibilities of young men nowadays. We now have young men who do not feel in control of their fate. And so if you give them a type of media where they get to witness someone who is just like them, downtrodden, who then gets all of these magical powers and has all of their problems solved out of thin air with no effort, that feels really good because this is what they would wish would happen to them. So in a sense, an Isekai story is like a mirror of the existence that you wish you could live. And you see that with the type of main character that these stories tend to produce. Because it's not just Solo Leveling that has a flat main character. Pretty much every Isekai has a flat main character. Why? Because that way you can project yourself onto them. And once you are projecting onto them, you get to live your life through them. And what do the MCs of these stories also all have in common? Well, in the world that they get catapulted into, they turn into gods. Most of the time, that's what you get. You get a dude who is in control of everything, which is exactly what you wish would happen in your life. Even in Solo Leveling, that is not that exaggerated, The MC of Solo Leveling is essentially a god because he controls reality. He literally has a panel where he can modify things directly that the average human doesn't have access to. And this is exactly what makes this jar so dangerous, because it plays off of your lack of agency. It plays off of the fact that you don't feel in control. But instead of teaching you how to regain control through effort, it gives you what we call in French un palliatif. It gives you a substitution. Because as long as you are spending time in that alternative world of fiction, you feel good. But once you return to your real existence, which is the one that matters, by the way, none of your problems have actually been fixed. If anything, they have gotten worse. Because the story you just consumed to escape your problems also teaches you the wrong lessons about how to fix it. And this is also visible in Solo Leveling. There is one scene in particular that struck me. The one where the MC is in the hospital. And he trains in the hospital. And as I said, in 2 weeks, he gets jacked out of his mind. But not just jacked. As I said, he gets taller, he gets more attractive. He essentially becomes a Chad out of nowhere. And once he becomes a Chad, what happens? The show goes out of its way to show you that every single nurse, female nurse in the hospital, is now hot for him. They all want his number. They all talk about him like, oh my God, he has the most perfect body. Why is the story doing that? Well, the story is doing that because it knows exactly what your desires are. It knows exactly that the type of young man who is going to consume Solo Leveling wishes they were in that situation. You watching me right now, who are in middle school, high school, college, you wish the girls in your class would have eyes for you like this. You wish they would actually go out of their way to talk to you and ask for your number. Why? Because you would feel desired, but also because it would take no effort on your part whatsoever. The issue is that this is not how real life works. In real life, even if you're very attractive as a male, you still have to put in the work. You will still be the one to make the first step. Women, even if you're a demigod, will not approach you. This is sadly a fantasy that is omnipresent in the minds of young virgins, young men who are not very experimented with women, who have never really had girlfriends or like long-term relationships, and who think that if they could just turn into Chad, then their situation would change. The difference between you and Chad is not just that Chad is taller and more attractive, it's also that Chad knows how to talk, he's charismatic, and he's funny. If you turned into Chad tomorrow, you would still be just as bad with girls, because you would like the ability to actually connect with them. And funnily enough, that's also what we see in Solo Leveling. Well, yeah, the main character gets female attention, but he doesn't know what to do with it, because he's a complete spug. But the story, of course, doesn't focus on that. Instead, as I said, it focuses on female reactions. And this is typical of Isekai. Most of the time, a trope that you find in every single one of them is the harem trope, which is a word I cannot pronounce as a Frenchman. It's the idea that once you get catapulted in this new universe, you will have a group of women who for some reason will all want you and not someone else. That is, for someone like me who is married and older, ridiculous. Because at first glance I can tell, oh, this is designed, like it's a teenager trap. It's designed to bait horny teenagers who jerk off into socks. That is plain for me to see, but maybe it's not plain for you to see. And this is really why I wanted to make this video, because Isekai stories and stories like Solo Leveling are a bit like porn. It shows you the fruits of your desire, and this is why you like it. But the more you consume it, the less likely you are to actually reach that fruit, because it keeps you frustrated and it keeps teaching you the wrong lessons so that you come back for more, so that you come back for more escapism to run away from this life, this real life of yours that you're not satisfied with. And as I said, this is not a glitch. It's not a mistake. The authors of these stories know exactly what they're doing, because Isekai is designed like porn. It's not supposed to be something that enlightens you or that makes you think. It's a simple consumer good. It's there for you to consume with your brain turned off. Whatever impact it has on your psyche or your ability to connect with women or to improve as a man doesn't actually matter at all. Which is why you might have noticed that the majority of Isekai stories are empty. It's not just that the main character sucks, it's that most characters in these stories don't have much to teach you, they don't have much to tell, because they don't serve a purpose. Compare something like Berserk to Solo Leveling. I'm sorry, there's not even a match. Find me 5 examples of symbolism or philosophy in Solo Leveling, things that were put there on purpose, because the entire critique of capitalism and self-improvement that I explained to you guys, I don't think that the authors meant that to be there. I think that it's just that they wrote a story that works perfectly as satire without them even realizing it. So as you can tell, I'm not a big fan of the genre. But I want to make clear that I didn't make this video to disgust you from watching it, because I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting some just dumb fun once in a while. There's nothing wrong with escapism in very small doses, because as I explained, male power fantasy is also that. It's a form of escapism where you live your fantasies through another man. But what the difference is that a good male power fantasy is supposed to motivate you and it's supposed to push you forward. And I actually believe that if you consume Solo Leveling with that in mind, the show is not that unhealthy at all. But as a citizen of the real world, someone who doesn't live in an Isekai, keep in mind that you're going to have to do all of this by yourself without the help of magical powers. Because at the end of the day, this is all we have. This body of yours and this existence, this is it. If you don't make it now, if you don't make an effort now, you never will. All of these ideas of backwards and maybe in another existence, nonsense. All of this is keeping you stagnant, all of this is keeping you mediocre because it's giving you excuses to not actually do anything, to not actually put in the effort. And I'm going to conclude this video on these words. Again, if you enjoyed this segment, please consider supporting the channel on my Ko-fi page, first link in the description. But it's going to be it for today. Thank you for watching. Have a good night.